Still here at Great American Beer Festival 2016 here in Denver, Colorado. I'm standing here with Niko, the brewer at Fair State Brewing Cooperative in Northeast Minneapolis. One of, I think, the best breweries in the Twin Cities, doing a lot of great lagers, a lot of great sours as well. In fact, if you read my Star Tribune column that came out just today, this being, what is today? October 6th, then Niko and Fair State feature prominently in the story about sour beers. So tell me a little bit about your sour program. How much of your production does your sour program actually make up?
Sure. So right now it's about 25% total, and that includes kettle sour beers that are both on draft and in can, and then the more limited release, large format bottle, mixed culture stuff.
So kettle sour is a term that's tossed around a lot these days. It's something that seems like a lot of brewers are doing, but I suspect a lot of people out there drinking sour beers don't actually know what that means. Can you explain kettle souring?
Yeah, so totally. So part of the issue with sour beer, I don't know, call it an issue, it takes a long time. So a true mixed culture sour beer, you're talking about an environment that includes multiple different microbes, different lactic acid producing bacteria, as well as multiple different kinds of yeast. It's kind of a battle royale in those environments. It takes a long time for acid to be produced, and you have bugs that are doing some tough work. Kettle sours you could also kind of refer to as a quick sour, because what you're doing is you're providing ideal conditions for a fast acid-producing bacteria to do its work, and then you are removing that bacteria from the process. So the reason we call it kettle sour is that we actually treat the kettle as a fermenter. So what we do is we boil the wort for a short period of time, and then we chill it down back into the kettle. We pitch a large amount of our house lactobacillus culture into that, and then over the next, anywhere from 18 to 24 hours, we see the pH drop pretty aggressively, and the acid level comes up. At that point, we boil it so it's sterile. There's no living bacteria in it, and then from that point on, we can treat it like normal beer. So it's more flexible in terms of hop loads, different yeast choices, wort composition, whatever you want to do. Basically, it's clean sour beer that turns very quickly.
So when you're doing your measurements of pH, are you stopping that fermentation based on reaching a certain pH?
Yeah, basically. So we've actually started to do more testing for actually like titratable acidity to try to figure out how much lactic acid we actually have in the wort as opposed to going by pH, because there's some environmental factors that might affect pH, water composition, and so on and so forth. But yeah, basically what we're doing is we're looking for it to hit the pH or TA value that we want, and at that point we would just proceed onward. So lactobacillus, the one that we use is, we would call it homo-fermentative. It only does what it's going to do. It's not going to actually produce ethanol. So it doesn't really use very much of the available sugar, and stopping it early or late doesn't really affect the flavor profile of the beer too much, like it would with artificially arresting yeast fermentation. Yeah.
So sour beers, they've been called the new hops, if you will. It's the thing that everybody is kind of gravitating towards now. Whereas 10 years ago, if you'd given somebody a sour beer like this one that's in my glass, they would have looked at you like you were insane. What do you attribute this new boom in sours?
Well, I think that a lot of it is really just it's what people called for. I mean, I think there's been a burgeoning interest in the industry for a long time, and as we see here today, like, this is a beer drinking event for the drinking public, but it's also like a meet and greet and say hello to your old friends for the brewing industry too. So you get in contact with people in the brewing industry and their ideas. You see what people are asking for, and sooner or later, like, that's just kind of rise out. So there's not to say that if people hadn't been calling for sour beer, we wouldn't have been making it. We probably would anyway. But I think really it is just that demand, very simple, has been driving people to do more and more and more and more of it.
So this beer that's in my glass is your Lichtenheiner. This is another sort of burgeoning trend in craft beers, this revival of extinct or nearly extinct beer styles. Particularly, it seems like German beer styles, which this Lichtenheiner would be one. It's a really interesting beer style. Can you describe, talk a little bit about this beer and this style?
Sure. So I think traditionally Lichtenheiner would be, you would put it on the same spectrum as like Gose or Berliner Weiss, so like German style sour beer. I think there are differing accounts as to how much Brett may have been a factor in these beers historically, and people have different ideas about what is and is not okay to do with these things. But basically, Lichtenheiner is smoky sour beer, and it's a smoky sour wheat, excuse me. So it would traditionally be brewed with a high percentage of wheat. That malt would have been smoked. At the time, probably all malt would have been smoked over a wood fire, sort of by dint of process, and then fermented with whatever neutral ale yeast and also some sour bugs. The trick with ours, what we did, is it's actually all barrel fermented. So it's existing in that full bore mixed culture, all kinds of different bugs going on in the barrel environment. So the funk level is a little bit higher. It's a little bit drier than your average example might have been, and for that reason the alcohol is a little bit higher as well.
What I like about this beer is the smoke character is actually really subtle. It's not like a smack you in the face with smoke kind of a smoked beer. It's more, there's this little hint of campfire in there that to me sort of pushes the malt character forward even a little bit.
Yeah, well, you definitely do get more malt because of that. I think some of it is that you're thinking about malt while you're drinking it. Part of it is also that this beer turns a lot quicker than your average barrel sour beer. So it's not a year old, it's not a year and a half old, it's 5 months old at this point. So some of that character might still be in there. What's funny about the smoke character is that this beer is actually 100% smoked malt. So it couldn't be any more smoked. And I think that's a misapprehension that people have about smoke beers, is that a lot of building smoke beers is picking the right wood and using the right smoked malt, so it's not going to knock you over the head, and then figuring out what the beer is going to look like. I think sweet and smoke, when you put them together, like in a big Scotch ale or something, that's where you end up feeling like you're drinking, a sausage.
And sour and smoke are not flavors that you would expect to work well together, but they really do.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I forget what the first smoked sour beer I had was. I think it was probably a Chester King beer a number of years ago, and I had the same reaction, like this shouldn't work, but it completely and 100% does. And I think even more than that, Saison yeast and smoke play together ridiculously well.
Yeah, it's phenolic and phenolic. I mean, smoke is a phenol, so... Another thing that you guys do really well is lagers, and that's also another kind of growing trend. People in the craft beer world are moving away from big knock-you-over-the-head beers and moving back towards sessionable lagers. I know you're a particular fan of lagers, so what draws you to those beers?
Well, so I guess, first of all, we just got lucky on trend. It's been really good for business. Yay! So my professional background, I came up as a lager brewer. I worked at a mostly lager brewery in Texas. And I think the attraction for me and for a lot of people is that it's uncomplicated. It's simple beer, but you need a strong focus on technique and ingredient selection. So a lot of the mistakes that you could make in terms of recipe formulation or poor technique are things you can't get away with lager brewing. And so for that reason, a good lager beer just makes me happy inside, because I know it was well made and somebody must have cared about it when they made it. And also, at the end of the day, I think, I've said for a long time, I think the longer you work in the brewing industry, the more likely you are to gravitate towards pale lager beer at the end of the day. Because it's just beer, Like when you think beer, it's like, I just want a ding-dang Pils. Like, let's make this happen. Yeah, so that's what we drink, so it's what we make.
Yeah, I first discovered that here, as a matter of fact. The first time I came to GABF, we were wandering around. This was 2007. We were wandering around drinking all these great big barrel-aged, super hopped-up beers. And at a certain point in the night, I was just like, somebody give me a Pilsner. But that was at a time when there weren't a lot of Pilsners, particularly not in this hall. And I wandered this place just looking for a Pilsner. And then finally stumbled on Trumer. A great one to stumble on. And what you said about it making you happy inside, beer should make you happy inside, really.
That's the goal. Yeah, that's why we do it, Yeah.
So, Niko, thanks for giving me some of your time. Everybody, hit up Fair State. They're really good. Cheers. My glass is empty, but cheers anyway. Enjoy the fest.
Drinks.